Everyone. Maybe we'll get started. Hello. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the second of the School of Art Galleries virtual talk series featuring artist and writer Amy Lam. My name is Blair Fornwald, and I am Director-Curator of the School of Art Gallery at the University of Manitoba. We are in Treaty 1 territory. We are in Winnipeg, and I'm speaking to you from the homeland of the Métis Nation and on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene. Signed in 1871, Treaty 1 took territory from 7 Anishinaabe First Nations to make the land available for settler use and ownership. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of both past and present, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of conciliation and collaboration. Wherever you are joining us from, I would ask that you take a moment to consider the land that you are on and your relationship to it and its original inhabitants. We are delighted to welcome Amy Lam as our second speaker. Amy was born in Hong Kong and lives in Toronto. For many years, she collaborated with Jon McCurley as the artist duo Life of a Craphead in conceptual art, performance, media art, and curating. And it's in this context that I first became aware of Amy's work and that we met. I've always been interested in artists whose practices are collaborative, participatory, and generous, and in artists who use humor to address complex and challenging ideas. Amy's work is definitely that. Life of a Craphead will be presented at the Seoul MediaCity Biennale this year. Amy is also a founding member of Friends of Chinatown Toronto, a grassroots group working against displacement in Toronto's downtown Chinatown. Before I turn it over to Amy, a glut of things. I would like to acknowledge the support of the University of Manitoba and the School of Arts faculty and staff, as well as national and provincial funding agencies, donors, and volunteers who keep the lights on and help us do this programming. I also want to thank the School of Art Galleries' fantastic staff who have been working so hard under challenging circumstances to bring programming to you. They are Jonna Jones, C.W. Brooks, Jean Borbridge, who is here tonight, Christina Hajar, C.L. Cottle, and Casper Stein. Thanks also to the staff of the School of Art for their support, particularly Kaylin Harrison, Communications and Events Coordinator, who was on tech support detail tonight. I would also like to remind you, or tell you for the first time, that the School of Art Gallery is once again open by appointment. So you just need to call or email to set up an appointment, and Brooks will let you in. The details for how to do so are on our website. From now until March 15th, we are presenting an exhibition, really beautiful one, called Dancing with Tantalus. It's about the crisis of touch, and it's curated by Lillian O'Brien Davis. And it features work by Gabrielle LaRondelle Hill, Katie Lyle, and Ella John McGuff. We've also got a video called Arrest by Toronto artist John Sasaki. Those projects are both up until March 15th. We also have a ton of exciting virtual programming coming up. So in conjunction with Dancing with Tantalus, we've got a writing workshop with Nick Wilson on March 6th. And on March 7th, a movement workshop with Katie Lyle and Shelby Wright. And on March 11th, a performance by Ali Robson. So I think that there are spots available for both of those workshops, and they both look pretty fascinating. So I would encourage you to register if you're interested, no matter where you are. Also, on March 4th, we're going to be hosting a virtual artist talk, another in this speaker series, by award-winning Siksika artist Adrian Stimson. And on March 5th, we're launching a really cute and exciting project called Pause, Protest, Activism, Whimsy, and Self-Care in Animal Crossing. It opens with a panel discussion featuring artists Kaylin Kennedy, Adele Lynn, and Hoku Kano Shirts, and it's going to be moderated by curator CL Noel. There's more still, and I would encourage you to check out the School of Art Galleries website or any of our socials to find out more about our upcoming programming, also to register for events and receive links to our Zooms. Finally, we're going to be streaming this live on YouTube right now, and we're going to be recording this video and uploading it to YouTube for posterity. So I would like to ask that everyone make sure that their audio is muted if you haven't already. You can do that by clicking on the microphone logo at the bottom left of your screen. You can leave your camera on or turn it off, but you might be on the recording. That's fine. We also have ASL interpreters available for this talk. Their names are Shannon and Christina. They're going to be switching back and forth. Thank you so much, both of you, for providing this important service. We also have live transcription, which you can turn on or off by clicking on the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom panel. And one thing that I just learned is that you can drag and drop that text wherever you'd like it. So you can move it around. And if you're having any technical questions, please just message the SOA Gallery Tech in the chat window, and Kaylin will do her best to help you out. We're going to have time at the end of Amy's talk for questions, but if you have a question or comment, you can also type it in the chat anytime during the talk, and Amy said she'll try and address them whenever she can. We'll also be collecting comments and questions over on the YouTube Live and delivering them to Zoom for consideration. And now, after that significant ado, I would like to turn it over to Amy Lam, who has generously agreed to give us a presentation. Thank you. Please give her a warm digital welcome.
Hi, thank you for coming to my presentation. My name's Amy, and I'm speaking to you from Jojage, also known as Montreal, which is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Paga. And I'll just give a little map of what I'm going to do. So first, I'm going to read some recent writing that I've been doing. I'm going to read 4 poems from a book that I've been working on. And then after that, we can have just like a minute of silence to do whatever you want. Close your eyes or, I don't know, lie down or something. And then maybe I'll set a timer on my phone and the timer will go off. And then I'll continue talking and I'll show some pictures and stuff like that and talk about other work. So that's the map. And like Blair said, feel free to put questions in the chat. And if I can address them in the moment, I'll try. And also thank you to the School of Art Gallery for inviting me. And thank you also to the ASL interpreters. Okay, so I'm gonna start reading. And like I said, there's 4 poems. Just a content warning, there's a mention of suicide in the first poem. And then, yeah, we'll have the small bit of silence after the 4 poems. We pray before dinner. We pray before dinner. My grandma starts praying loudly while my uncle is still talking. She's hungry and she wants to eat. Dear God, she says, as my uncle is talking about Android phones. Thank you, God, she talks over him as he's saying Samsung camera is, for the food on the table, better than iPhone, and for keeping us all healthy and cheaper. In God's name we pray. My uncle says, oops. My grandma concludes, amen. On the television, the presidential nominee starts saying, you know the thing. And then the cuckoo clock goes off. Cuckoo, cuckoo. Once my grandma told me without any warning, I had 20 brothers and sisters and 19 of them died, all dead. I asked, what, how, why? She didn't tell me anything else. She said simply, I don't know why. She looked at me with her usual expression, I don't know. Then she said, her eyes slightly wider, I know why you're asking me so many questions. Why, I said. She said, because you want to make a movie of my life. I said, oh. Other facts have been told to me in the same way. The other day in Chinatown, a woman with white hair and soft flowered pants let out a big loud sigh. She leaned herself against a fire hydrant. She lowered her plastic shopping bags to the ground. She said, "Aya, so painful." I went over and asked if she needed help. She said, "No, it's okay, I'd rather walk." She said, "Do you know what the doctor told me?" The doctor said the only option is to chop the leg right off. Yes, that's what the Western doctor said. And my daughter told me, if you chop it off, I'm not going to push your wheelchair for you. I said, oh my God. She said, of course I don't want to chop it off. I'd rather walk around in pain. Chop it off is the only option, I asked. She said, yes, this is the way human life is. And then our conversation ended. And at the juice place with the yellow walls, the owner asked me where I'm from. I had a foamy green juice in my hand, the green foam like the edge of a lake. There was a sign on the wall for the special drink with chia seeds, sparkling water, chia seeds, and fruit of your choice. She said, I have an uncle who lives in Hong Kong. He left Vietnam during the war. He jumped off the boat as soon as it arrived in the Hong Kong harbor. He saw cops boarding the boat and he ran away. He was never registered as a refugee and he never got documentation. Now he lives in Hong Kong renting a bed somewhere, you know, one of those cage beds. I asked, have you talked to him recently? She said, no, but I have children and grandchildren and I let them do whatever they want because otherwise people will kill themselves, she said, like one of my nieces. The girl had to buy a rope. Can you imagine going out to buy a rope? Where did she get the rope from? She said, in conclusion, you can't try to control people, they will kill themselves. She said this with certainty. Back at dinner, the TV continues to play loudly. After the election coverage, there's a melodrama. It's about an elderly woman who's dying of cancer. She was the nanny for a man who is now grown. Her own children died young, so she dedicated herself to him. She made sacrifices to care for him. The man is very emotional. He regrets not being there for her. He appeals to God and asks God to save her life. He cries that there has already been too much suffering. The old woman looks ahead, his hand in hers. My sister cries silently. My mom is crying too. I'm also crying, and my grandmother looks like she might cry too. The woman in the movie says, I don't agree about the suffering. I know how I learned this attitude, and I don't care if it's good or bad. On the table, the food sits steaming. There's a platter of cheese steamed choy sum with garlic. There's a bowl of lotus root soup. My uncle explains the causes of populism. A car beep boops outside. Then, wee-oo, splitting loud, wee-oo. Land made of food. In the land made of food, in the beginning, the ground was a milk until it was boiled and squeezed into tofu. Then came the rest, hot sauce, shot up from below and filled up the seas. Rocks appeared, peanuts, then trees with leaves of roasted nori and trunks of nougat. And when it rains pierogies. No one has to work in the land of food because you can scoop right from the ground into your bowl. This is the fantasy of many who have had to work. Without the institution of work, would this dream be needed? Or would it be accepted that not everything is food and not everything can be cooked or eaten? The fact that even some things can be eaten is amazing. There's some lands in which there is no life at all. The amazing fact that there is life at all. The rich want to go to Mars or another planet where life is not as visible or where there are no known traces. They will bring their own food with them. Spirit turns a knob. Life arises from the food. Life grows in a warming soup of hot sauce. Here come the smallest farting bacterias. Here come the most extravagant molds. The molds bloom fuzzy bright yellows, purples, and grays. The bacteria jump and burst. They fall into warped paisley patterns. The patterns transfix and obliterate the utility. Baby's book. There are 5 books on a shelf. A baby's book for myself as a baby, a children's book for myself as a child, a teen book for myself as a teen, an adult book for myself as an adult, a senior's book for myself as a senior. The baby's book is printed on light blue inflatable plastic pages so that it can float in water. The children's book comes with a lock and key. The teen book has long horizontal pages that take 2 people to flip. The adult book is slim with thin rice paper. The senior's book is covered in mirror-finished gemstone green. The books contain stories for me or someone like me. It's important that they're beautiful objects. There's also a piece of burnished mahogany on the shelf, a family heirloom. After decades, it still smells amazing. It smells like a spicy wind inside a delicate silk cage. Quote, taste and smell are the only senses that trigger memory. So I eat to try to remember my life as a baby. If I can eat what I ate when I was 1 year old, then maybe I can remember my memories. I'm just curious what it felt like to be a baby in the world's most expensive city, and by extension, parents raising a baby in the world's most expensive city. How does a city become the world's most expensive? That distinction can seem like a natural fact. It's so expensive here, said in the same way as it's an island, but it's because a colonial government lays claim to all of the land and then doles it out in limited contracts to favorite parties, and then everybody has to rent from those parties. The British in Hong Kong, the British in the world, the British act like a natural fact, like an island, like oatmeal, like germs, like a stick, as if ancestry is a natural fact. On the television show, The Crown, the royal family is depicted as deeply unhappy. They have to keep procreating in a fixed way. The characters say things like, everybody has to make sacrifices, as if sacrifices are what constitute natural facts. Oatmeal, pate, smoothie, brown basmati. Now I eat oatmeal, but I used to hate it. I used to hate it so much I would have a standoff with it. That was after I left my obedient phase. I would let it grow cold on the table, and then after some fighting, eat it congealed with the milk skin on top, and continue to fight while eating it. My parents would say, you only do what you like to do, you don't do anything you don't like to do. Then they would sigh, but what a nice, obedient child you used to be. Before the oatmeal, I was quiet and never a problem at family functions. The only small issue was that I liked to touch random things. After the oatmeal was finally finished, Mom and Dad would go to the restaurant and make meat sauce rotini. The other day I read a book called Franklin is Afraid of the Dark. I wonder if my mom had once read it to me. Franklin the turtle is scared of small dark places. He's afraid of the dark inside his own shell. He's so scared he's tied a rope around his shell and drags it around after him. He doesn't like to go in it. I'm scared of the idea of sacrifice and how it acts in families. I'm tired of the idea of sacrifice and how it's used for immigrants. My fear makes me run, but like the turtle, I still have to drag it along behind me. Anyway, Franklin goes for a walk. He meets other animals and tries to get help. Unfortunately, they can only offer him things that are helpful for themselves. A polar bear who is afraid of the cold offers a snowsuit. A duck who is afraid of deep water offers water wings. A lion who is afraid of loud noises offers earmuffs. Franklin wanders home all tired. His mother was scared that he had gone missing and hugs him. He's so sleepy he crawls into his shell. And when no one's looking, he turns a nightlight on, and then he sleeps inside the shell with his light on. The story is amazing because it's about a fear that's based on some essential part of yourself. It's about a fear of your own essence or something that defines you. And in the end, the fear is still there. The turtle doesn't get rid of it. To be clear, none of this applies to the royal family. They shouldn't be allowed to keep any of their jewels. A bit of steam, poof, gone. Here is the devotion of offering food to the no longer living. A detailed, yet elegant, explanation about how the oatmeal is made. Okay, and this is the last poem. It's called the people's dream. The artist residency in New England sent an email with the subject line, "We are removing colony from our name. Now it will be named only after its founder, No Colony." One time at dinner there, I told my story of going on a $99 all-inclusive week-long bus tour in Sichuan, China. I went with my family. We thought it was a good deal. My dad was the first to vomit. I felt very upset with him, like I blamed him. Before long, everyone on the tour bus had food poisoning. The tour guide kept smiling at the front of the bus, ignoring the sounds of retching. We were brought to a tea museum. I thought maybe I'll learn something about tea. Instead, we were ushered quickly from the small display area into an enormous gift shop. We were left in the shop for several hours or until enough sales were made. Then we were brought back onto the buses. The buses drove for exactly 1.5 minutes to the other side of the parking lot. It was the Silk Museum. Again, we were led into the gift shop. Again, we were left there for hours until the retired man from California, from Hong Kong, green in the face, gave in and bought a silk comforter for $400 USD. Then we were driven to another restaurant that looked exactly like the restaurant we ate at the previous night and the night before. Same menu items and tablecloths and chair coverings, but different buildings, different locations, and different people. No person who is not Chinese from North America ever eating at any of these restaurants. No smaller group than 2 busloads of people at a time ever entering these restaurants. The man from California vomited on the doorstep. Following the lead of our smiling tour guide, the rest of us stepped over the puddle to go into the restaurant. Many plates of food were brought to the tables, even though no one was hungry. Afterwards, we got back on the buses, and this repeated for every day for another week. Halfway through the week, I saw a statue newly erected of Han and Tibetan friendship. I realized we were participating in a government project in Tibetan and Chiang territory. I tell this story, and everybody at dinner in the fancy place in America is laughing. Loud laughter all around the table. One man says, "You should write about it for Harper's." At the table, there are a few people who have actually written for Harper's, and they agree. It's a great story. I feel embarrassed and return focus to my lamb chop, pan-seared with rosemary. I feel embarrassed for telling a story they enjoy so much. I should have complicated it with references to American or Canadian projects. I should have included that our smiling tour guide survived the Sichuan earthquake of 2008, which happened while she was working on a bus. Now it's time for dessert. Vanilla strawberry shortcake on a crisp white platter is delivered by a high school student, and beside it, a mound of whipped cream in a bowl. The folds of cream gently absorbing light. The night is rich, soft. I walk back to my little cottage studio in the woods. The sky, the objects, they all have the perfect texture. Everything is absorbent. In order to fall asleep, it helps to imagine myself as someone else, not me, but someone with an entirely different set of issues, a set that is knowable, contained, enumerated on a list. When I was 11, I would imagine myself as a 13-year-old white boy in order to fall asleep. He is the main character in a book called Hatchet that I found at the library. His small plane crashes and he's left alone in the Canadian wilderness. He has to learn how to survive by himself. The only tool he has is a hatchet. He eats berries and turtle eggs and makes fish traps out of sticks and grass. Nature around him is scary, but he overcomes it. I would sleep in his cave, carved by water out of rock, surrounded by little piles of dried berries, fish, eggs. I would count and check on each pile before sleep. I would list each precious item. Then I would fall asleep and dream his dreams. A country blue house in a cul-de-sac at 3 a.m. The highway loops around it. There are gases that are scented so as to not be odorless. There are gases that are odorless. In order to fall asleep, I am someone putting together a Christmas tree, a fake one from a crumpled cardboard box. Each branch is made of twisted gray metal and plastically fabric needles. The trunk is painted green, not brown, so as to be more hidden. The trunk is hollow with little pockets where the metal branches can be inserted. The interior metal tip of each branch is daubed with paint to label where it goes in the trunk. Yellow means bottom of the tree, the biggest. Red is the middle of the tree, smaller. Blue is the top, smallest. And the very top branch, the one that sticks straight up, that the star or angel sits on, does it have its own color or is it obvious? It's obvious. It's loose, not yet put in place, starless, angelless, lying loose on the dusty rose carpet. In the dream, it has to be turned upside down and ignited. Okay, wow. That was the first time that I've read any of that out loud to people. So yeah, thank you for being here and listening. So those poems come from a book that I'm working on, that I've been working on for the past 2 years. The title of the book is Square and Round. And when I started writing about food, which is why there's so much food in everything and all of them. And then it kind of turned into making records of things that I've experienced or anecdotes that have been told to me, especially stories that my family tells, stories that usually only live through speech or other vernacular forms like emails or text or things like that. And then in the act of making records, I also tried to record things that I can't remember. So I can't remember, for example, how I learned English. I don't remember a lot of the experience of immigration. So there's these holes in these supposedly life-defining events. And the kind of mystery is, I guess, what I'm trying to write about, the mystery, but then also these very plain facts. So that's what I've been working on for the last couple of years. And in thinking about that writing, I thought that there's kind of two main ideas in the work that I'm doing lately, and which also tie back to previous work. And those two things are like autobiography, which is obvious, and then infrastructure. This idea of infrastructure as like the structure between things, relationships, things that we are dependent on, like, you know, in the city or to keep our lives going, that support us, but that are also oppressive. And I guess a question is, how can people change the infrastructure? How can people change the things that they're dependent on? So I'm going to show some works that are related to these two ideas, some from the distant past and some from the near future. And I'm also going to describe the images for people who are just listening. So I'm going to share my screen right now, which is like this. And there we go. So this picture is from 2013. It's a picture from the Life of a Craphead 50-year retrospective. So like Blair introduced, I worked with Jon McCurley as the collective Life of a Craphead for 15 years. It ended last year in 2020. And this was a show that we did in 2013 when we were invited to be artists in residence at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And when we were invited, we had this opportunity to exhibit in what is known as the Community Gallery, which is the gallery that's in the basement in the hallway and is free for anyone to see. It's called the Weston Family Community Gallery because it has a sponsor, even though it's in the basement. And at the same time that we were like, you know, in the basement, like looking at this gallery hallway space, we upstairs at the museum was this big blockbuster show of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And it was this show that really like went deep into their biography to the extent that it showed like a photo at the end of the exhibition. There's a photo of Diego on his deathbed, like dead, like his corpse. And at the beginning, they had like photos of them as babies. No, that part's not true. But it was this huge kind of like, it's like, you know, classic museum blockbuster show with lots of interpretive material. And it talks about the entire life of these artists as if it's like this beautiful narrative arc, you know. And so we thought, okay, well, we're artists in the museum. We should have a retrospective. And so that's what we did. We had this Life of a Craphead 50-year retrospective, which began in 2006 when we started and then ended in this projected date of 2056. And we showed past work as well as works that we proposed for the future. So I'm going to show a couple of these images. So this one is from 2032, but it's a future work, and the image is a diptych. The top image is a photo of a finger on what looks like a contract, and the first kind of sentence is embedded illegal substance, and then there's these different clauses about what Life of a Craphead is doing to you. It's going to do to you if you buy this. It's a contract between Life of a Craphead and the buyer. And then in the second image, it's a photo of what looks like a storage area with all these Tupperware bins and costumes hanging on racks and bits of wood and stuff. And then there's a man who's crouched on one of the shelves, who's John, who's inspecting an artwork, I guess. And then the interpretive panel that goes beside the image, I'll read it out loud. It says, drugs in our stuff. We added illegal substances to all Life of a Craphead props. Our contract of sale forces buyers to acknowledge that they purchased an illegal substance, prevents them from removing the illegal substance, and guarantees that they will be punished according to the law. As a consequence, no one can show, buy, or own any Life of a Craphead work legally. And then there's this footnote, props are the costumes and artifacts from our past performances. So that was a proposal that we said we were going to start at a certain point in our career, and that would become a part of our practice that we would just do all the time. And similarly, another work that we showed in that retrospective was this thing called the good towel, which I also find a little bit confusing, but maybe we can talk about that later. It's called the good towel. The image is of two men wearing sunglasses. They're wearing black and also have black leather gloves on, and they're kind of maneuvering this wooden box that is like the size of a cabinet or maybe a coffin or something. The box has gold trim, it has like a gold design on the front, and it has this little lock. You can kind of see this little lock. And they're in front of this audience of people who are sitting with their back to the camera, and the audience are clapping. And then in the corner, you can see this laptop with an Apple logo and a little candle on this little table. And they're in this big room. They're actually in a Bailey Court at the AGO, the big conference room there. And the text says, although they still create all Life of a Craphead work, Amy Lam and Jon McCurley are no longer physical representations of Life of a Craphead. Instead, they've replaced themselves with the good towel. The good towel is a towel kept in a sealed, humidity-controlled cabinet that will preserve it forever. Life of a Craphead have confirmed the good towel is just a towel, but is unique in that it gives presentations and is accompanied by handlers. So the proposal here is that Jon and I would no longer need to exist as artists, like living bodies, I guess, and instead we would have this towel that maybe we would also have to give directions to, so we would still have to be alive. But you know, perhaps the towel could proceed with just like a set of instructions, like a Boston Dynamics robot or something, and keep going after death. And the towel, I think the important idea here is that the towel can never decay because it's kept in this very special box. Yeah, so on that, I guess on that note of like, you know, something lasting forever, I'm gonna move to this other work, which is a more recent work from 2019, also Life of a Craphead work. And it took place in Saskatoon, where we had a show. The show was at an artist-run center called AKA Artist Run, and the show was called Entertaining Every Second. And in this photo, which is taken from across the street, you see two buildings. So you see this building that looks like you don't really know what's going on in this building. There's words and there's pictures on it, and there's kind of a big billboard, and it looks modern, I guess, but there's not really clear indication of what's going on. There's kind of like a poem written on the facade. And then beside it is this other building that's smaller, has two windows and a door. It looks very simple. It's covered in plaster that used to be red, but now it's faded pink. And it has this handwritten sign that says Jin Jin Cuisine on it. And so in Saskatoon at the gallery, AKA Artist Run, or where the gallery is, the street is a Chinatown, or it kind of is like a fading Chinatown. So there's still Chinese restaurants and grocery stores, but a lot of them are closed or like have been converted into like, how do I say this without saying like hipster bars? I'm sorry. But they've been converted into these bars, but they still have like the Chinese restaurant, you know, memorabilia or whatever. And that's the fact of the street. And so our project, actually, and one other thing is that where AKA Artist Run is located, the gallery, it is actually located in a building that used to be a Chinese restaurant as well. So our project that we enacted is called Until Either One Closes First. Until Either One Closes First. And so this next image is of a text panel that describes the project, alongside a small metal sign that's for a table that says Jin Jin Cuisine, and a green brochure. So I'll read this text panel, which says, next door to AKA Artist Run is Jin Jin Cuisine, a Chinese restaurant that has been open since 2009. This is an agreement where all exhibition openings at AKA Artist Run will be catered by Jin Jin Cuisine for the rest of time until either place ceases operation or they're no longer neighbors. To acknowledge this relationship, a logo for Jin Jin Cuisine has been added to all AKA Artist Run communications, including the website and print materials. So this green brochure that's beside the text panel has a red arrow that's pointing to this logo that's been added for Jin Jin. And then the next image is of food from Jin Jin, a metal tray with scallion pancakes and fried dumplings, and there's dipping sauces in the middle that was brought to for our opening. And I think like two notable things about that is that at the opening, it was the first time that the restaurant, a couple runs Jin Jin Cuisine. It was the first time that either of them had ever been to the gallery next door, even though they've been there since 2009. And also, the other thing I wanted to mention is that Jin Jin is still operational today. So they have managed to survive the pandemic, hopefully still, and this relationship is ongoing, even though there's no events right now. Yeah, and then the other thing I just wanted, so this leads me to the next project, which is something that's going to take place in Toronto's Chinatown, where I usually live, this fall, this September. And it's part of a project called the Parkettes Project, which is curated by Shani Parsons. And it's part of the City of Toronto's so-called Year of Public Art, which they also have branded as Artworks with an XTO. Anyway, so the image that we're looking at is of a Google Street View image, and it's of Glasgow Street, which is a small laneway in Chinatown. It's on the east side of Spadina. And these houses are like two-story houses that are row houses, and they're all connected together. So they look quite different from like the Victorian houses in the rest of Toronto. They were houses that were built for the workers initially. And the neighborhood was started out as a Jewish neighborhood, and then in the 50s and 60s turned into Chinatown after the first Chinatown was expropriated and Chinatown had to move. And so when I picked this parquet as my location for the project, oh yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about parquets. I mean, because it's a weird word, but basically it just means like small park. And it's interesting how they come into being, because lots of them are created because like that particular parcel of land is no longer fungible. Like it's no longer, they can't sell it, or they can't really like do anything on it, or maybe there's like a weird highway or like a railway line that might bisect it. It's like an odd shape or something. So yeah, so that's a parquet. And this parquet is called the Glasgow Street Parquet. It's off the laneway, and the image that we're looking at now is of the parquet itself, which has, you know, trees, and it has some benches, but it looks quite fancy. Like it looks expensive. It looks like someone put money into it, because there's this curved wooden boardwalk. The benches are curved and they look different than like normal City of Toronto benches. The lighting is like, they're kind of like these cylinders that are aluminum, and it's symmetrical. It's designed in this way that looks kind of symmetrical with planters for the trees. And you can also kind of see these like metal stanchion things that delineate the edge of the park. And so when I visited this park in the beginning, when I was doing research, I was like, why does this park look like this? It doesn't look like normal or like the regular Toronto parquet, which is usually just like a strip of lawn, you know, with a wrought iron kind of fence around it. And then in my research, I realized that this renovation, so the parquet was renovated in 2018. This renovation is actually tied to this development that exists at the end of Glasgow Street. So in this next image, we see the Glasgow Street view. We see the parquet on the right side, and then we see these row houses on the left side, and we see all the way to the end of the street. And then at the end of the street is this big new building. It looks like an office building or a condo building. It's 24 stories. And that building is actually known as Campus One. And Campus One is a private student residence that is affiliated with the University of Toronto. So it's privately owned. It's owned by like a firm called Knightsbridge Capital, but it has this U of T branding associated with it. So I'm not exactly sure how that works, but that seems to be like a new kind of model for university residences. And if you go to the website for Campus One, which is this next image, you can see all of these amazing amenities that Campus One has, 5-star amenities. So this is an image from the website of Campus One, which has a list of like 30 different things. One column says peace of mind included. The second column says 5-star amenities. And some of the 5-star amenities are like innovation lounge, video game lounge, relax room, stuff like that. And then peace of mind includes a dining program that's operated by U of T, fully furnished units, really good Wi-Fi, 24/7, on-site security, and a very interesting note at the bottom, which is that it's Feng Shui compliant. So this building is targeted towards international students. And I was looking it up on Reddit to see how much it costs to actually live there. And I think from the last thread that I found, it costs $1,700 per room. $1,700 per room. And I don't know, I don't think that comes with the dining program. Like, I think the dining program is extra, but I'm not entirely sure. Regardless, it's expensive. And then on this Reddit thread, this person who was like giving a review was like, you know, because people are like, should I live there? It's so expensive. And then this person who was writing was like, you know, there's some really good things. Like, first, like the Wi-Fi is really good. There's really good Wi-Fi. But there's a bunch of bad things, like there's no social life. There's lots of surveillance. Security will barge into your room at 8 a.m. like yelling at you to do security checks. And also, they don't know how to make rice. The cafeteria doesn't know how to cook rice properly. So that's kind of a feel for what Campus One is. And what I found out was basically that this Campus One building, so now we're back at the image with the street view with the Campus One at the end of the street, there had been a long struggle, a long fight by residents of Glasgow Street and from the neighboring community against this development that was proposed by Knightsbridge and by U of T. Because of its size, and also, I mean, it's obvious like the way that it would impact the neighborhood. And so from about 2010 to 2015, there was this long fight against it. And the city actually also opposed this development as well. I spoke to a resident who was involved in that named Jenny, and she talked about how one of her most distinct memories was going to this meeting with the developer, Knightsbridge, and with U of T, and this feeling of like, no one is listening to me. It's supposed to be a community consultation, no one is listening, which is a very common experience in terms of, you know, relating to developers in the city in Toronto. And eventually what happened, I mean, I'll just say one more thing, which is that at the time, I mean, it's different now, but up until recently, the street was mostly elderly Chinese people, Fujianese people, like families who lived on the street. And then what happened, as often happens in Toronto, is the city refused the proposal because it like is way over the height allowance for College Street. But then it went to the Ontario Municipal Board, which is known as the OMB. And that's like an appeal board that's very developer friendly. And the OMB basically approved the development, and they were like, it's cool, it's fine, it's not going to disrupt the street. And they also talked about this thing which doesn't exist, where they were like, the developers actually proposing like this transitional landscaping between Glasgow Street and the development, so it won't look that bad. But in real life now, when you visit it, you just kind of like go to the end of Glasgow Street and then you hit this brick wall, which is the back of Campus One building. And then what happened as part of that OMB decision was that $1 million was given to the city because of this variance over the height, building over the height, which is part of this thing called Section 37 in Toronto. So because the developers were building over the city planning height guidelines, I don't know how they came up with this number, but there's like a way they calculated, but I think in this case it was like not calculated in the normal way. Anyway, they gave $1 million to the city, and then 350,000 of that $1 million went into the renovation for this parquet for Glasgow Street. And when I talked to the resident, Jenny, she said she didn't really have an answer for why the money went into this parquet, and she said, like, I don't really want to talk about it. Like, her literal words were like, let's not go there. And then I was telling her about how I was doing an art project in the parquet, and she's like, what can you actually do in that parquet? Like, maybe you could have a reading club if you wanted to, which I thought was a pretty funny joke in terms of what she thought like the most boring thing could be. So my project for this parquet in the fall that I'm working on over the rest of this year is to memorialize this direct relationship between the building and the parquet in some way. And the way in which I am going to try to do this is through a city program, so through an official City of Toronto program, which ties back to the idea of using infrastructure, like the existing kind of things that are in place for memorializing things. So the City of Toronto has a program that's called the Commemorative Bench and Tree Program. And I'm sure many people have seen it. It's a program where you can buy a bench basically and put a plaque on it that has a name. And usually it's for someone who passed away, or, when someone sat on this bench and, or they lived in this neighborhood, things like that. And the interesting thing to me about it is that it's a program that the city maintains. So when you buy the bench, they promise to maintain the bench for you for 10 years. And then after 10 years, I guess they just don't care anymore. But I think what I would like to do is have the city have to do the work of maintaining this memorial instead of it being something that they ignore or that they kind of aren't responsible for. So that's the project that I'm working on over the next few months and into the fall. And I guess the last thing that I'll say, which is just that this development here on College Street has, even though it's kind of on the edge of Chinatown, this development in other student residences that are affiliated to U of T or are targeting U of T students, particularly international students, have really affected Toronto's Chinatown. And the condo building that the group that I'm a part of, Friends of Chinatown Toronto, is currently fighting, that's slated to be at 315 Spadina, is also targeted towards students. And we see this in cities all around the world where universities are kind of like the main drivers for these residences that gentrify and displace neighborhoods. And so the last thing that I'll just briefly talk about, and I'll put a link in the chat if people haven't yet visited, is the bathroom project, which I worked on last fall, and the link is publicbathroom.online. Oops, I fucked up the link. It's one word, there's no space. And that's a project that I did with SFU Galleries, another university, Simon Fraser University in BC. And it's an online website that is a representation, an interactive representation of the SFU, the bathroom that is closest to the gallery at SFU Galleries where I was supposed to have a show. And so it's a rendering of that bathroom, and there's different interactive things that you can do in it, like talk to other people, strangers, anonymously. You can also leave graffiti, and you can read text from your mom on a phone. And that project was really a response to the conditions of the pandemic, obviously, and the idea that we have to keep working nonstop online all the time with no kind of break. And the project for me was really based in my experience working in an office in an institution at a museum, and then really going to the bathroom for extended periods of time when I needed a break. And then also really going to the bathroom and making sure that there's no one there so that I could just sit on the toilet quietly for a while. But also is tied to the ideas of public space now during the pandemic, where all these restaurants and bars and places, like commercial spaces where people would normally go to use the bathroom, are no longer available. And the effects that that has on unhoused people who have illnesses, lots of different types of everyone who has to use the bathroom, but especially the unhoused, and especially in winter in Canada. So another part of that project, if you go to the website and you click all the way to the end, is a sticker project that I did with a group called Toronto Toilet Codes, which is a group that disseminates codes for toilets through their Twitter and online and on a map. And we did a sticker project that's about different public spaces allowing people to use their bathrooms instead of just paying customers, which is obviously difficult now because of COVID, but is something that, is really necessary. So I feel like I talked really fast and I'm tired. So that's all I think from me. And I'd be happy to take questions and talk about anything that anyone wants to talk about. And maybe also the last thing that I'll say officially is that I have a chapbook coming out that's being published by Yokeless Press based in Calgary that's called The Four Onions. And I think it'll be ready around the end of April, beginning of May. And then I also just wanted to say there's some people in the Zoom right now who collaborated on some of these projects. So Bridget Moser was I guess the coordinator coordinator, digital, what would we call you? Print production coordinator for the Life of a Craphead retrospective in 2013. And Su-Ying Lee, who's in the Zoom, was a curator for the AKA Artist Run show in Saskatoon. And then Jen Jackson was the curator of the Make Believe Bathroom project. So thank you to all of those people. Yeah, Bridget says intern, JK. So thank you. I'm happy to take questions now.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was a really fascinating talk and a really beautiful reading. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I guess I have a really quick and easy question. When will what's it called? Round and Square? When will your book be coming out?
That's a good question. I don't know yet. Yeah.
Sorry.
But thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm finishing it and then I'm going to find a publisher. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Will all the poems that you wrote today be in that book, or is there another place we can read them in the meantime?
The poems are, all of the poems that I read today are in that book. And then one of those poems is in the chapbook that's coming out in May. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you.
I can also just maybe talk about the title of the book quickly, which, so it's called Square and Round, and it comes from these two Chinese sayings that I learned about. And one of them is, heaven is round and earth is square. They're these 4-word sayings. And Tian Yun, Bei Fang. And then the other one is a saying about how a person should be or could be, is advised to be. And the saying is about how a person should be square on the inside, have principles, and I guess be kind of rigid, but round on the outside so as to get along with society. So Loi Yun, Oi Fong. And yeah, that's where the title comes from. That's all I have to say about that.
Oh, it's a really like visual way of like thinking about ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a question in the YouTube, or sorry, in the chat. What will be on your monument in the parquet?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it will be text that I'm still figuring out exactly what the text will be, but it will be like in the style of what the commemorative bench program offers, which is a metal plaque. It's a small metal plaque. It's pretty modest. It's like, yeah, I mean, I could find a picture of a bench on a plaque on a bench and show you, but it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's like an engraving. But yeah, I'm gonna figure out what the text is gonna be.
Can I ask the bathroom projects, the last work you showed? I'm just curious on how that was effectuated. Like, do you use like a rendering software, like an architectural rendering software to make it, or were there other like ways? And like, yeah, and also how also the way you put it on the internet also. I think that's interesting. They can just click a link and go into, and it's very interactive. So I'm just, if you can maybe shed more light on that part, that work.
Yeah. The way that it's built, I worked with a web developer, as well as an artist who did the rendering. So it's based on photos of the bathroom, and then Emerson, who's the 3D artist, made a rendering of the entire bathroom space in Blender in like a 3D program. And then the way that it works is the website is actually just images of different shots of within the 3D rendering. And then the website has different functionality built within it. But basically it's all just images. So it's not actually like you're navigating a 3D space, but you're kind of interacting with different points. And then so it behaves in a certain way, but it's not an actual kind of like it's not like a video game, for example.
Yeah. So the actions, like the clicks, like where you these different actions was that kind of made in like tight collaboration between the web designer and the 3D artist, or did they work differently? Like in a sense, somebody make one part of it and the other person made part of it, or they work together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely work together. And so it was like I determined what the functions would be, and then the web developer would build that out. And then we would tell Emerson, like the artist, like, okay, can you please put a phone here? And we need different images of the phone so that when you click on it, it gets bigger or smaller, or, we need different sizes for the piece of paper that you draw on so that when you click on it, it can get bigger. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's another, Paul says in the chat that they would also love to ask you a question.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, Paul, I can hear you.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I can hear you.
That was so generous. And I just want to say, like, somehow I think when I first got to know you, you would always express this idea of a discomfiture of being somebody with a writing background in art. And now it feels like you're more specifically being a singular kind of artist in language. And it's so rewarding to hear you read these poems tonight. But I wanted to ask you about the politics of observation, which is something that I wrote down in listening to you, that in your poem, there's a kind of beautiful moment of people speaking over each other through the prayer at dinner, and your uncle talking about the phone. And I was thinking about the difference between listening and not listening, and noticing or not noticing. And I think you wrote, or you said something to the effect of like autobiography, which is obvious. And I think that that's like a way of saying like, of course, we're all aware that we're alive and we all have a story, but it's like the noticing and the listening and the detail. And so I thought maybe the best way to sum that up in a question, if you're not too exhausted with speaking, is to kind of think about trusting your powers of observation, which was really like visible in the way that you described the images, even like wanting to create accessibility for people without sight, like to be able to trust in your power to observe something and then and share it through language.
Thank you, Paul. What was the question again?
I thought you could tell me. The question is like
ask you a question.
Yeah, the question is like a broad kind of like, Amy, how did you learn to trust your powers of observation? And what are the politics around that? Like, I feel like it's always imbued with some kind of subjective, like political orientation. And I mean, you're known for calling people out. Like you're known for kind of like not hiding your politics in terms of the observation of what you recognize as unjust. So is that a question? I'm not sure. Are you too tired to begin to answer? If so, move on. I apologize.
No. I mean, yeah, that's a good, I mean, I guess one of the things is like when I started writing, I wasn't even quite sure what I was doing, you know, like it's like when you start a project, you don't really know what's happening. And that's what it was like at the beginning, like 2 years ago. And so when I said like I started writing about food, it was actually like I was just writing about like literally things around me. Like the very first, the kind of seed of the whole project was me writing about this weird TV show called Restaurant Makeover. Anyway, there's this like funny episode that I really love. And ultimately that got like cut out of the book, but I guess it was just in making that record of like what I was thinking about the TV show and where that led me in terms of like, okay, this TV show and then this weird thing happened in the TV show. And then, you know, and then I saw this tweet about cheese and then cheese made me think about this. And it was really like following that chain of associations. And so maybe in terms of observation, it's like, yeah, it's like paying attention to what, or just like taking what I'm experiencing and seeing on an everyday basis, like seriously, and like seriously following what comes out of that. And in so doing, like, yeah, taking life seriously. And maybe like one thing that I'll say that relates to one of the poems that I read, like there's a line in Baby's book where I talk about like how when I was younger, I liked to touch random things. And my mom told me this story about how when I was young, I was like really obedient. I was really easy to like take to, you know, dinners and stuff because I would always be really quiet. But my only problem was that like, I like to touch things too much. And at the beginning of the pandemic, she actually sent me this message where she was like, Amy has always liked to touch things since she was young. So this is this is going to be a problem for her, the pandemic. But she also told me the story about how I was like very observant. Like I was very quiet, but I was very observant as a child. And she talked about how when we were in Hong Kong one time, I noticed this logo for the Mandarin Oriental, which is a really fancy hotel in Hong Kong. It's a chain of hotels. And then I noticed it in one place. I guess this was probably when I was like, before I was 6 years old, before I immigrated. And then later on, I noticed again, like the same logo in a different place. And this memory stuck with her, where it's like, yeah, Amy is observant. She notices these things. And then the interesting kind of point of convergence for me, like now, was that recently I've been researching about the Opium Wars and the history of that in Hong Kong and the opium trade in Hong Kong. And the Mandarin Oriental is actually owned by a company called Jardine Matheson, which was one of the largest, it was the biggest opium trader in Hong Kong at the time. And so, you know, it's this thing that's like a coincidence, but is also not a coincidence. It's like a piece of magic in a certain kind of way. And maybe that's like the power of observation. Yeah, that doesn't really answer your question about the politics part, but yeah. you can, yeah, I have nothing more to say.
I have maybe one more question, if I could. It seems like in some of the earlier like Life of a Craphead work, you're kind of engaging in like sort of imaginary propositions or like sort of not useful propositions, and maybe working in kind of an antagonistic relationship with city infrastructure. Like I was thinking about like maybe this piece called like Musical Street or something. And I think that there's been this shift maybe in your collaborative work and then also in your independent work towards like doing real like sort of structural policy change and like kind of like working in a really kind of pragmatic way where like, you know, you're talking about like policy, city building, infrastructure bylaws. And I wonder if you could like talk about that transition.
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess like my first thought is that, you know, in maybe it's more grounded and well, I don't even really like to, you know, compare it in that way where as if it's like progressive or something, but I guess in some ways it always has just been based on like, you know, our lived experiences, whether in Life of a Craphead and what John and I were experiencing at the time. So that idea of like going to the AGO and seeing this Frida and Diego show or whatever. And then the way in which like Glasgow Street Parquet is the way that I've been thinking about the project, the way that is because I'm involved in this group, Friends of Chinatown, and we're always in relation to the city somehow and in relation to like developers and like these planning policies. So I just have like more information about that stuff and I know what Section 37 is. So when I do the research, I read that and then I'm like, oh, I understand what's going on here. But I guess going back to what my first thought kind of is that like, in a way it is still imaginary, you know, like with the commemorative bench program, it's like, I hope that the city will, you know, give me the permission to do this thing, but there is a possibility, maybe strong possibility that it won't be allowed, you know, and I'll have to come up with some other way of doing it that is not the real way, but resembles the real way, you know, so that's like the other option that I've been throwing around is like, okay, if I can't do the plaque in this through the original city way, then I'm just going to have to like make one myself, you know, and then what will that look like? So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe it's just like more tools in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Marvin's got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for this great talk.
Thank you.
When I was just thinking about your slides on your Life of a Craphead projects, and I just had this epiphany about how much you guys are concerned with the relationship with the past and the future, and how you seem to kind of create these imaginary artifacts, but the artifacts are actually remnants of yourselves or your own ideas. And in a way, it's sort of like, I kind of like understand your work as Life as a Craphead as both artists and archaeologists. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Mm.
Please.
Please. Thank you for your question, Marvin. Well, when you say past and future, it makes me think about actually like the writing and like how much in the writing I'm thinking about past and future and like writing for a past self and writing for a future self. So that's the first thing that makes me think about. I guess in terms of like Life of a Craphead as archaeologists, yeah, I don't know if it's so much that we're like trying to discover something from the past, which I guess I'm just kind of stuck on this literal image of the archaeologist. But I think that in terms of doing the retrospective, it was, you know, really trying to think about, well, the artwork or like performance in this way where it's like, okay, lots of times it exists as a story, right? And like in lots of performance art, it's like, you just need to know the story. Maybe you don't even need to see the image. You just need to know that, oh, this person had someone invited the audience to like cut off all their clothing or something. And that's the story. And that's this thing that can live and just is passed on easily and kind of, has this incredible mobility and like flexibility. And so in making those works, like the Good Towel or the other ones that I showed, it's like, okay, well, what's the story? And that's why the interpretive panel is such an important part of it, because it's like the story can just be that. Like you could have the image, but you know, the story can exist by itself. And I don't know, I guess I just come back again to the idea of writing and like these stories that like move backwards and forwards in time and how they travel.
Is there still time for another one? Another question?
Yes, I'm on mute. Yeah, there's
cool.
Or Amy, would you have another question?
Well, I guess I just want to ask like what you would do when you're in charge of housing and development, or like, you know, that's one way of asking it, or another is like if you owned like a block in downtown Toronto, or like if you own just like one building like somewhere near Toronto. But you know, it's kind of a sovereign question, I guess. But you know, I think it's like clear to me that you actually kind of know what action is needed, and maybe like how to kind of run things, or like maybe the like roles were miscast by fate.
Like, are you saying I should be a developer?
No, well, I mean, but you know, developer wouldn't mean the same thing if you were one. But I'm kind of like curious, like what you would do, or I mean, I guess it's like a question of kind of like causality or something. Like a lot of times as we organize, we have to we kind of play a reactionary role against the injustices that we're just trying to survive. And I'm kind of curious, like how do you envision kind of like primary action, or like not even primary action, but like primary, like a primary, wait, so what was Marvin said, or no, you just said in response to Marvin that there's like the one kind of conceptual like story that makes a performance kind of like last historically. Like what would yours be in the case of kind of like, you know, the needs of survival and of bodies and people?
It's interesting because one of the things that that we're doing in Friends of Chinatown is trying to figure out, like, okay, how do you not just be reactionary in terms of these developments? And one of the tools that is common now is this idea of a community land trust, right? And like starting a community land trust and owning property and taking it off the market. So I guess my answer to your question would be that, yeah, it would be a community land trust with like permanent, you know, housing that's not a commodity and doesn't cost money to live in. But it would also be a community land trust without it having to be in this model of what it needs to be right now, which is like a nonprofit structure, right? Like a legal nonprofit with a board of directors and like all of these things. Because that is just something that, yeah, that's just like a model that is required. in this system, and it sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it, and it's required, I mean, it's required because it kind of slots into the whole paradigm of how everything is produced and like how value like is overlaid on everything. So it would kind of, I mean, functionally it might be somewhat similar to a nonprofit or to the non-profitable imperative. but it would be, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Like it's like the framing falls away.
Yeah, like it can't be within like the settler colonial like legal model, you know, but that's in which like community land trusts now still have to be. And yeah.
Does that mean, do you feel kind of resistant to the nonprofit model then? Like, I mean, you know, at a point, some of the things that you're doing might need to take on that model. Or, you know, at least maybe would never need to if you have like the thinking to be flexible. But like, when, I don't know, I'm kind of curious about that line, like how you think about that, like incorporating in the nonprofit way or yeah.
I mean, I definitely like, yeah, I'm like resistant to it and I have lots of questions about it. But I also like collaborate with lots of other people who have similar questions. But then, you know, we also make decisions to try to be effective in some way. So there's like lots of different strategies that you can take, and like, you know, some of them you just do, but maybe it's not the most ideal kind of situation. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Well, actually, I realized too that like Dord and Life of a Craphead kind of, I mean, it's like you have organized a lot of like space for survival, and like I remember like being offered a room inside the Dord like floor one time when I needed a place to stay. And for anybody that doesn't know Dord, it was a performance series, a comedy performance series that Amy and Jon, and I think other people too were involved in, but I mean, you and Jon, Life of a Craphead was kind of the main organizer or like hosting identity of it. And it was like just a really kind of, I mean, it was just like an amazing sort of space for art. And it kind of coalesced around something you might think of more traditionally as like a comedy kind of almost like open mic type of situation, but you have to sign up like through the like cultural scene. There's no sign up sheet.
That's curation. There's no sign up sheet. Yeah.
Well, but that exactly was like actually making so much space for life to happen in.
Yeah. I mean, the venue was also the venue was called Double Land, and it was run by a different group of people. But yeah, totally.
I mean, just that stage, like, just like having the kind of, like folk, I don't know if I would, maybe it's like audience or viewership or something, but it's kind of more than that because it's a lot more to me from the other side, the side that's not the audience, the side of performance that's not the audience. And it's not just the performer, but it's like some kind of collective space that is like, you know, I'm just talking about the green room. Thanks, Amy.
This is like the green room. Thanks, Jason.
And thank you everybody for asking your questions, and like everybody popped in the chat and then said, do we have some time for a question? It was like so polite. It was the most polite like Q&A I've ever like witnessed. But I guess our time is up. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, Amy, for your really generous talk and reading.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good night.
Thanks.